ये हमारे अंदर एक नेचुरल फिनोमिना है, और बल्कि इस यहाँ तक कहा जाता है कि इसकी खास जीन्स भी हैं। तो हम ये आर्ग्यू कर सकते हैं कि चूंकि पीडोफिलिया भी नेचुरली जनरेट हो रहा है, तो वो भी एक नेचुरल एक्ट है।
It's true that the mere fact that something is natural to a person, if we define natural narrowly to just mean it's there by birth, does not automatically make that thing legitimate. But this is not the argument that's actually coming from the gay rights side. Aside from that one bad argument, which is a straw man, there are contexts in which the naturalness of homosexuality for homosexual people, or same-sex attraction for same-sex attracted people rather, is actually relevant, and it's not a fallacy. For example, it's brought up as a rebuttal to the bad argument that homosexuality is unnatural, therefore it's immoral, or therefore it's immoral for gay and bi people to be sexually active with people of the same sex or something. It rebuts the premise that homosexuality is unnatural. It's also brought up in the context of policy because people who are trying to change the sexual orientations of gay people, who persecute gay people with the thought this will somehow deter gay people from being gay, need to understand that that's not going to happen. Gay and bisexual people's sexual orientations don't change because of the fact that they were persecuted. And to explain that, the fact that homosexuality or same-sex attraction is natural to them, is simply a part of their nature that they have no control over, is relevant. It's also relevant to the issue of whether God wants gay and bi people to exist. The fact that there are people who are born gay or bi, or for whom it is authentic and a part of their nature, is evidence that God wants them to exist. Pedophilia is not like that though, because even if we assume what is probably true, that some people are just born with pedophilic tendencies, unfortunately that does seem to be the case with a very small percentage of people, much smaller than the percentage of people that are naturally same-sex attracted. Nevertheless, if somebody acts on pedophilic attraction, they are necessarily committing abuse. There is no way for a person to enter into any kind of morally acceptable relationship on the basis of pedophilic attraction. But there is in the case of non-pedophilic same-sex attraction.
अब एक टर्म निकली है जेंडर फ्लूइडिटी। वो ये है कि कभी मैं लड़की हूँ, कभी मैं मर्द हूँ, कभी मैं मर्दों की तरफ अट्रैक्ट हूँ, कभी मैं औरतों की तरफ अट्रैक्ट।
Gender and sexuality are not the same. तुम लोगों को इतना भी नहीं पता, तुम लोगों को जेंडर और सेक्सुअल ओरिएंटेशन के बीच में फ़र्क भी नहीं पता। मतलब औकात नहीं है इस टॉपिक पे बात करने की। You don't even know the most basic stuff.
जेंडर्स जो प्रोनाउंस है शुरू होते हैं 10 से 50 गए, 50 से 72, अब 100+ प्रोनाउंस इन लोगों के जो ऑफिशियली एक रजिस्टर जो होता है, रजिस्टर आप कर लेते हो प्रोनाउंस और जेंडर्स को, हो चुके हैं।
अच्छा, ये ऑफिशियली रजिस्टर्ड हो गया है, चलो अच्छी बात है। तो किस इदारे में रजिस्टर हुआ है? इदारा का नाम बताओ, फिर मुझे दिखाओ कहाँ है, फॉर्म पे लिखा हुआ है, कहाँ है, लिस्ट दिखाओ कहीं। Anyway, this whole 72 genders thing is a right-wing trope that originates in Western right-wing propaganda. The way it started was that at some point Facebook gave people the option to write in their gender. So they had the options male, female, and then you could type in a custom gender. And so people did that, and some people just kind of made stuff up. I don't know why they do it. Maybe they genuinely believe it. Maybe it's a joke. I know that there are some people who just say stuff jokingly as well. Like there's young people, young trans people sometimes who just make up. They'll be like, oh, my gender is triangle. Now, these right-wingers are dumbasses and cannot understand satire. So they'll be like, oh, आजकल तो ये तो conspiracy, देखो वेस्ट में क्या हो रहा है, ये तो triangle वाला gender भी promote कर रहे हैं. I can be triangle if that's what I want. Anyway, so a right-wing Western person went and found a bunch of these written in answers and said it was 72. Well, it's actually 72 plus 2 because there's also male and female. And then that just became this trope of 72 genders. But this is not some kind of official consensus. It's not like, oh, there's an official position. हमने declare कर दिया, हमारा पूरा एक organization है, ठीक है, सारे trans लोग हम जमा हो गए हैं और हम सब एक ही हमारा जहन जो है सारा connected है. तो हम एक दूसरे से हर पॉइंट पे एग्री करते हैं और हमने ये कहा है कि अच्छा ये 72 है ना, ये ऑफिशियल हम नंबर देते हैं.
You can be a dog, a cat, a wolf, butterfly, tomato.
This is a tired old transphobic talking point that's already been rebutted many times. I have a video explaining why gender self-identification does not imply species self-identification.
कौन से genders हैं? मैं हैरान हो गया, मैंने एक टर्म पढ़ी biosexual, someone who loves nature.
I've never even heard of this. Loving nature is called biophilia, not biosexuality. It's not sexuality, it's just a general kind of love. And that's got nothing to do with gender, because again, gender and sexuality are not the same.
यानी हर जेंडर सेक्स के इर्द गिर्द जो है वो घूम रहा है.
नहीं उल्लू, ये तुम हो कि जिसको जेंडर और सेक्सुअलिटी के बीच में फर्क नहीं पता.
अच्छा, तो तीसरा जो इनका आर्गुमेंट है वो ये है कि वी आर ट्रैप्ड इन अनदर जेंडर्स बॉडी.
यार तुम लोगों ने गे राइट्स और ट्रांस राइट्स के कुछ आर्ग्यूमेंट्स और कुछ स्ट्रॉ मैन आर्ग्यूमेंट्स भी कचूमर बना के तुमने जमा किया है यहाँ पे. This is to do with trans, and what is it an argument for, first of all? In general, anybody who is giving an exposition of an argument, be clear what the conclusion of the argument is and what the supporting assumptions or the premises of the argument are. So in this case, what are trans people advocating for? The right to have legal gender recognition, the right not to be discriminated against, or what? In any case, the phrase born in the wrong body is an old one that was used by trans people in Western societies and some other societies as a way to try to communicate to cis people who were transphobic what it feels like to be trans. Most trans people in this day and age simply do not think like that. When was the last time you heard a trans person say that they were born in the wrong body? I have heard multiple trans people explicitly say that they don't feel that they were born in the wrong body.
अच्छा देखें, पहली जो बात है ना, जैसे कि कहते हैं कि पर्सनल चॉइस है. देखें, एज मुस्लिम्स हम अपना जो हमारा मॉरल एंकर है, हमारा जो राइट एंड रॉन्ग का कॉन्सेप्ट है, हम अल्लाह सुब्हानहू व तआला की किताब से और रसूलुल्लाह सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की सुन्नत से लेते हैं.
See, this is a big part of the problem, is the fact that you try to base your ethics or your normative beliefs in general on the Quran and the Sunnah. You definitely need to be not doing that. People should not be basing what they do in life, the rules that govern their lives, on religion. And the reason I say this is not because I think everything within all religions is bad. I don't think that. I think there are positive elements of all of the major religions, the major legitimate religions of the world, but I still vehemently oppose basing one's normative beliefs on these religions. And the reason I oppose it is because even in the instance where a religion is right about something, so for example, if Islam goes and says things like one should be kind to animals, and there is a tradition within Islam that says that, there are some hadiths and so on that suggest that one should be kind to animals. In the instance where it is right, what makes it right is not the fact that Islam says it. Islam is now saying something that is in line with a prior normative fact. Another way to put the point is that Islam or any religion either comes from God or it comes from human beings. It's just made up by human beings. Now, if it's just made up by human beings, it has no more normative significance than any other case of humans just having opinions about things. The presupposition made by these kinds of religious people, and not all religious people are like this, but this kind, is that it is something that comes from God. But if it comes from God, then that raises the question, does God have reasons behind his commands? If God has reasons behind his commands, then those reasons are what are actually doing the normative work. And those reasons are the things you should be appealing to. So it's simply irrelevant to even bring up the issue of Islam saying something or some religion saying something. You can just directly go to those reasons. If God does not have reasons behind his commands, then why should we follow what he's saying? That means that God has an imperfection within his nature. And I assume that these theists do not in fact believe that God is imperfect in the sense of being arbitrary.
Let's talk based on logic, reason, rationale and evidence.
Obviously, how else are we going to talk as opposed to what? Based on illogic, lack of reason, lack of evidence? I mean, that is what you've been doing the entire time. Abhi logic or evidence ki thodi si qadar tumhe aayi hai, yeah, at least you're saying it.
And let's use the same ethical model that the West is using and show them that even with their own standards, this should be prohibited. इस वक्त West जो है ना believe करता है liberalism के अंदर और let's say harm principle के अंदर.
ये West कोई इंसान नहीं है कि जो beliefs रख सकता है. The West doesn't believe anything. It's not a person. It's a civilization encompassing many nations and cultures and many individuals, all of whom don't agree with each other amazingly.
वो actions को gauge करते हैं as being neutral या okay unless and until they infringe upon the rights of other people.
That's not the harm principle. That's just a basic assumption about rights, which is there within common sense morality. But a lot of people also hold more nuanced views than that. Another thing that's annoying as hell and doesn't make any sense at all from a philosophical point of view is why these people are constantly going on about West. Westerns, West में ये होता है, West में सारे लोग liberals हैं, वो सारे harm principle को accept करते हैं और West में बुरी चीज़ होते हैं तो हम तो West की तरह नहीं होना चाहते हैं तो इसलिए हम trans लोगों को persecute करते हैं, ये जायज़ है, और gay लोगों को क्योंकि हमें West अच्छा नहीं लगता. Now, obviously, it's a total logical fallacy. These things are not inherently Western. These are ideas. They belong in the world of ideas. They're not plants that grow in specific geographic locations. They're not physical products being manufactured in factories that only exist in certain countries and then shipped out to other parts of the world. A lot of people in non-Western societies also think like this, and a lot of people in Western societies don't think like this because we're all human beings at the end of the day. But this weird exoticizing, or I don't know if exoticizing is exactly the right word, but this kind of depiction of Western people as if they're strange, non-human creatures with their own weird ways of doing things that normal people don't want to do is part of a Muslim Jahil right-wing propaganda strategy, so they don't have to actually engage with the substance of the arguments because they're not going to win, but also as a way to try to emotionally manipulate people into disliking this stuff or opposing it because of any negativity they may have toward Western culture. So they try to inculcate some negativity. They're like, oh, yahan dekho kitni buri cheezein hote hain, dekho ye kya kar rahe hain, old folks homes. It's often old folks homes for some reason. Like Aure Maqbool Jan, for example, says this shit, and he uses point against Aurat March. Like, what does Aurat March have to do with old folks homes? Like, for God's sake. The strategy is to manipulate people by showing negative things in Western societies and being like, oh, you don't like the West, do you? Well, this thing is inherently Western. If you don't like the West, you can't like this either. That's not how this thing works. This is not a cultural phenomenon. This is an idea. They're perfectly happy, of course, to chapa Western right-wing talking points, but they say bad things about the West otherwise and think that if they insult the West hard enough, then they've somehow made a case for oppressing trans people and gay people in non-Western societies.
This personal choice has consequences. This personal choice has harms associated with it.
Right.
Homosexuals are 20 to 40% more likely to commit suicide. Homosexuals do not have stable relationships.
Homosexuals don't have stable relationships, really. You haven't come across any gay couples that are married? There's literally gay men and lesbians that have been married for decades. This is not only a bongy, it's blatantly prejudiced and homophobic.
But the majority of homosexuals have 30 or more partners. Homosexuals are about 50% more likely to suffer from depression and engage in substance abuse. Risk of suicide भी जो है वो quadruple हो रहा है. क्यों homosexual lifestyle की वजह से?
None of these things are inherent to being gay. Men have higher suicide rates than women. Does existing as a man or living a man lifestyle constitute a harm as well and violate the harm principle? In any case, it's inconsistent with what this guy earlier said about the taking of drugs, because he was saying that according to the harm principle, it's okay for people to take heroin or cocaine because even though they're hurting themselves, they're not violating anybody else's rights. But now he's saying that a homosexual lifestyle violates the harm principle because it hurts the individual himself. He is not addressing female homosexuality, so that's why I'm saying himself. But according to what he said earlier, that doesn't actually count as a violation of the harm principle.
Numbers don't lie.
These aren't just numbers, these are hypotheses that you have come up with to try to explain the suicide rate. You're saying that it quadruples if a gay person is sexually active. The implication is that if they were not sexually active, they would have a lower suicide rate. I really would like to see some evidence to back that up. And since the policy you're advocating for is prohibiting homosexuality, you need to show that prohibiting it is going to reduce the suicide rates. Most likely it's going to have the opposite effect, if it has any effect at all.
अगर 60 साल expectancy है तो homosexuals के अंदर जो है ना वो 30 to 40 year life expectancy है. क्यों? Substance abuse, depression, suicide.
Even if this nonsense was true, how does this show harm from a person existing as gay or even being sexually active as a gay person? These aren't harms. These are deficiencies. I'm not saying they actually exist, but these claims that this guy is making are of deficiencies, not harms.
इस वक्त वेस्ट में भी एक्सेप्टेबिलिटी है.
सही.
क्या ये रेट्स नीचे जाने के ऊपर जा रहे हैं? मुझे नहीं पता. ये स्टैटिस्टिकल स्टडी हमें देखनी पड़ेगी.
सही.
हाँ, अगर ये रेट्स नीचे जा रहे हैं हम कह सकते हैं they can be an argument that can be made. ठीक है. And someone who is going to be arguing that he has to show कि ये statistics कम हो रही है कि नहीं.
No, you have to show कि ये कम नहीं हो रहे हैं. You need to show that this is not in fact minority stress.
A homosexual male is 20 times more likely to develop anal cancer. Anal incontinence हो जाती है इनको. They lose the ability to control that muscle even. Common है homosexuals के अंदर.
It's ridiculous that I'm actually engaging with this, but that's false. Most gay men do not have anal incontinence. And anal sex is a sexual act, not a sexual orientation. Some heterosexuals engage in anal sex, some gay men don't, and female homosexuality also exists. Heterosexual intercourse can result in vaginal fistulas, and does in some cases. Does that mean that heterosexuality is harmful and should be prohibited? Heterosexual intercourse can result in unwanted pregnancies, which has all sorts of harmful effects down the line, like abortions, for example, are mostly caused by this, as well as abandonment of children. Does this mean that heterosexuality should be prohibited?
ना सिर्फ ये अपने आप को हार्म कर रहे हैं, लेकिन सोसाइटल हार्म भी है.
सही.
ये एक डिजीज के स्प्रेड के अंदर एक मुजरिमाना किरदार अदा कर रहे हैं.
What societal harm? This was in the context of HIV infections, but it's not going to cause harm to other people unless people are being infected without their consent or through actions that they're not consenting to. So if a gay man becomes HIV positive, which the vast majority of gay men are not, and the even vaster majority of lesbians are not, how is that going to cause anybody else to become HIV positive? Unless it's a situation where they consent to participate in some risky behavior and then the other person gets infected. But then it's not affecting non-consenting parties. And if it's happening without their consent, as in the case of rape, or where any element of voluntary informed consent is not followed, like someone does not inform somebody else that they're infectious and they engage in unsafe sex with them, then the problem is the violation of consent, not the fact that they're gay or the fact that they're having sex with someone of the same sex.
Then harm to the family है. Family structure जो है ना खत्म हो गया. जब आप कह सकते हो कि दो मर्द जो हैं वो भी एक फैमिली हो सकते हैं, क्योंकि अब जो है 4 लोग भी शादी के अंदर हो सकते हैं.
This is just slippery, slopery. Whether more than 2 people should be allowed to get married or not is a separate conversation. And you, a Muslim, should really not be saying this, considering that you guys are the ones that advocate for and often practice polygamy. 2 men being able to get married to each other, or 2 women being able to get married to each other, does not destroy the family system or the institution of marriage. It just extends marriage from heterosexual monogamous relationships to homosexual monogamous relationships. It's not a destruction unless marriage ceases to exist, which is obviously not the case. Nor is it a destruction in the sense that there's no boundaries anymore and any people can get married with no restrictions whatsoever. It's entirely coherent to say that we can impose XYZ restriction, we're just not going to restrict it to being only between a man and a woman. So this is where the slippery slope fallacy comes in. The inference from, well, if we get rid of this one restriction that it has to be heterosexual, then that means we must get rid of all restrictions, even though that does not follow at all.
वो रश्क करते हैं इस चीज के ऊपर, यानी they feel envious कि यार मेरी खाला है, मैं उनके घर जाता हूँ, मेरे मामू हैं, हमारे cousins हैं,
वैसे में तो खाला हैं, मामू एग्जिस्ट नहीं करते, उनके अंकल्स भी नहीं है, आंटीज भी नहीं है, भाई भी नहीं है, बहन भी नहीं है, बच्चे भी नहीं है, इंसान भी नहीं है. वहाँ तो सारे AI वाले लोग हैं, ये जो इंसान की तरह लग रहे हैं ना, ये इंसान भी नहीं है, वहाँ रिप्रोडक्शन भी नहीं होती.
आज यूरोप जो है रो रहा है कि हमारे फर्टिलिटी रेट्स ड्रॉप कर रहे हैं.
और जाहिर है फर्टिलिटी रेट्स इसी वजह से ड्रॉप हो रहे हैं, और तो कोई वजह नहीं हो सकता, और कोई एक्सप्लेनेशन नहीं हो सकता. गे राइट्स की वजह से हो रहे हैं. लोग कहते हैं यार मैंने बच्चे नहीं पैदा करने हैं. अगर परसिक्यूशन ज़्यादा हो जाए गे लोगों की ना, तो तब हम ज़्यादा रिप्रोडक्शन करेंगे.
एंड अगर आप वो सरोगेसी वगैरह, सरोगेट मदर्स और स्पर्म डोनेशन, वो एक और लेवल
उसके सोशल मसाइल और
वो एक और लेवल ऑफ एब्सर्डिटी क्रिएट करता है.
इसमें क्या मसला है? These are just assistive reproductive technologies that increase the fertility rate. Heterosexuals also use these same technologies, more so in absolute number than gay people do. If you're against them, then argue against them. Then say, despite the fact that this increases the fertility rate, I'm still against these. But you haven't presented any consideration against it. All you've done is dismiss it because it challenges your pathetic worldview.
I'll ask you, मुझे बताएं इसका बेनिफिट क्या है?
What does is refer to? Does it refer to homosexuality or does it refer to gay rights? Because if it refers to gay rights, as in gay people's status in society, their situation improving so that they are more equal and are not discriminated against, then that definitely does have a benefit. It has a benefit of social justice. But if you're talking about homosexuality in and of itself, well, you can ask God that question because God makes it so that homosexuality exists. So he seems to think that there's some kind of benefit. Now, I know based on spiritual experience that there is in fact a benefit associated with homosexuality in general, the existence of homosexuality in the world. Everything on the external planes has an associated spiritual quality. And the spiritual quality of homosexuality has positive characteristics in it as well. And historically especially, that has been the case, especially with female homosexuality. So the presence of that energy in the world is overall a good. And we do see that gay people and queer people in general tend to be highly creative because they are less tied down by traditional structures and by the instinct to procreate, which is something that belongs to the animal nature. Now, that doesn't mean heterosexuality isn't a good thing or that homosexuality is overall better than heterosexuality. I don't think at present that homosexuality is overall better than heterosexuality. I think there are positives and negatives of both. But there definitely are positives of homosexuality and there definitely are negatives of heterosexuality. But even if that wasn't the case, it doesn't matter as far as gay rights is concerned. Even if homosexuality was just negative and heterosexuality was either just positive or was more positive than homosexuality, gay rights would still stand because gay people are human beings with rights, including marriage rights and so on, which are extensions of equality rights.
Some forms of sex are never safe.
Care to substantiate on that claim? You can't just throw that in there and not even explain what you mean by that. This was in the context of STDs. How are some forms of sex never safe when it comes to the spread of STDs? Are you telling me that if there are 2 men, both of which have been tested for HIV and the test results are negative and they have sex with each other, that's not safe as far as the spread of HIV is concerned?
वो अपनी तरफ से इंक्लूजन चाह रहे हैं कि हर सीरीज में, कार्टून में इनकी एक इंक्लूजन हो, इनके कैरेक्टर की. लेकिन उस इंक्लूजन का मकसद ये है कि बच्चों के माइंड शेप किए जाएं, बच्चों के लिए इस बात को नॉर्मलाइज किया जाए.
उस इंक्लूजन का वही मकसद है कि जो इंक्लूजन का जनरल मकसद होता है. If you look at older cartoons, older TV shows and so on in Western societies, they're mostly white. But over time, there's more inclusion of people of color. Is it because they're trying to discourage white people from like existing or reproducing, or trying to inculcate some sort of shame of being white, or saying that people of color are superior or something? No, they're just trying to show that this is also part of society and trying to be more diverse and inclusive. And that's what they're doing with LGBT people too, because LGBT people are also an identity group. They are also segments of society that are historically marginalized. This is just social justice. Why don't you learn a little bit about social justice and social justice movements and actually listen to what people on the left are saying instead of coming up with your idiotic conspiracy theories?
मगर जब आप कार्टून्स में इंक्लूड कर रहे हो, आप literally you're shoving this concept down our throat.
Yes.
It's not forcing just to depict something. By this logic, the representation of straight people is also forcing heterosexuality down people's throats.
अब हम हर जगह नहीं इस्लाम लेके फिर रहे होते हैं. हम हर जगह ये नहीं कह इस कार्टून में इस्लाम इन्वॉल्व करो.
अच्छा, तुम इस्लाम को इम्पोज नहीं करते किसी के ऊपर. So there's no Islamic law that exists anywhere in any society.
लेकिन actually speaking ना usually होता नहीं है ऐसे. You don't develop those feelings for the same gender unless and until you have nurtured your mind on these things.
तो इतना रिएक्शन में आने की क्या जरूरत है? एक तरफ आप हमें कहते हैं टॉलरेंस दिखाएं, तो फिर आप में भी इतनी टॉलरेंस होनी चाहिए ना कि आप सुने.
भाई ये कोई नई चीज़ नहीं है जो तुम कह रहे हो. हमने सुनी है, बहुत सुनी है. This has been stated from ancient times and all of these arguments have been refuted. But तुम लोग बार बार उसी बकवास को रिसाइकिल कर रहे हो. So what do you expect us to do? Get into a debate every single time? And you're not interested in debating anyway. I've already challenged Youth Club to debates. Well, I've challenged Raja Zia al-Haq in any case. The dude just ignores me. The reason we take the opinions we do is not because we didn't listen to you. We heard all of your arguments and we reject them. लोगों का हक उस हद तक होता है कि वो और लोगों के हकूक़ के violation ना करे. Roughly speaking, it's a little more nuanced than that, but as a general principle, it's helpful to think this way, which is not contrary to what has been stated earlier, the harm principle. तो अब जब तुम hate speech कर रहे हो, जब तुम gay, lesbian, bisexual और trans लोगों के खिलाफ बात कर रहे हो, उनके वजूद के खिलाफ बात कर रहे हो, उनकी existence के खिलाफ बात कर रहे हो, you're trying to frame them as pathological, you're trying to frame them as inherently criminal or danger to society, and advocating for criminalization of sexual activity that is consensual and safe and so on. That is a human rights violation that you are advocating for or engaging in, and you cannot expect being tolerated when it comes to that in the way that gender and sexual minorities expect being tolerated for merely existing or for engaging in acts that don't violate anybody else's rights and that are not otherwise wrong.
जो demonize करते हैं, इन्होंने खुद बायलॉज और लॉज प्लेस किए हुए थे जो इसे जो होमोसेक्सुअलिटी का एक्ट है इसे कंडेम करते थे. 1800 1700 से पहले ये सारे लॉज इन प्लेस थे.
This guy doesn't know when it was, which is why he said 1800 1700 से पहले, और उसने जल्दी कह दिया in order to quickly move past and try to hide the fact that he doesn't actually know the time period. But it's true, people in Western societies were more homophobic before, but that's not hypocrisy, that's just evolution. That's progress, which has happened when it comes to lots of issues, not only LGBT rights, including women's rights, racial minority rights, disabled people's rights, and so on.
जैसे एक इकलौता बेटा और उसकी 4 बहनें, तो वो बहनों के साथ अगर ज़्यादा खेलता है तो वो नर्चर इस तरीके से होगा कि हो सकता है उसे उन्हीं की चीजें पसंद आए. इस्लाम तो जनरल बुलिंग के ही खिलाफ है.
बुलिंग के खिलाफ है लेकिन persecution के खिलाफ नहीं है. मतलब एक इंसान दूसरे इंसान को इंटरपर्सनली बुली करता है और वो गलत है, लेकिन वो उसको जेल में रखता है, उसकी पूरी ज़िंदगी ख़राब करता है सिर्फ इसलिए क्योंकि उसने कंसेंसुअल सेक्स किया एक कंसेंटिंग एडल्ट के साथ, और वो जायज़ है. How the fuck does that make any sense?
मैं काउंसलर्स की बात बता रहा हूँ. जिम्मेदारी आयद होती है कि वो उन्हें एज क्विक एज पॉसिबल जल्दी उनका जो जेंडर रोल है सोसाइटी में, जो मारूफ जेंडर रोल है, उसके शौक पैदा करने की कोशिश करें.
What you're advocating for is conversion therapy, which besides being highly dangerous and a rights violation, is also something that just does not work and is even illegal in some societies for exactly these reasons.
लेकिन they grow out of it और वो फिर शुक्र करेंगे कि यार शुक्र है हमारे माँ बाप ने हमें कोई टीके टूके नहीं लगाना शुरू कर दिए थे, हमारी बॉडी को म्यूटिलेट करना शुरू कर दिया था.
Nobody goes and gives hormones to prepubescent children at all. First of all, prepubescent children do not undergo any form of medical transition anywhere, not in Western societies, not anywhere else. Teenagers sometimes do, but that's only because they have already transitioned socially and have been living as a gender they identified for years before they do that. And even that is not a common occurrence. It is the teenagers who are the ones really desperately asking to access that gender affirming healthcare. And cis teenagers also use gender affirming healthcare. There are cis boys that take exogenous testosterone. There are cis girls that take exogenous estrogen. And there are also cisgender kids that are on puberty blockers. Forcing trans kids to go through their natural puberty, which involves irreversible elements, is pointless and harmful. You need to justify why we should do that instead of letting them take some degree of control over their own bodies. There's a difference between behavior and gender identity. You guys don't even know the difference between gender and sexuality. So I suppose I shouldn't expect you to know the difference between gender expression and behavior on the one hand and gender identity on the other. So I'll go ahead and explain it to you, even though I'm sure it's going to be in one ear and out the other, but whatever. Gender identity is what gender you consider yourself to be. Masculine and feminine behaviors is just personality. There are cis women who are tomboys and who are butch women. There are also cis men that are feminine. Transitioning is only done in cases where the individual is trans, not in cases where they're just gender non-conforming, which is what you were describing earlier. And even then, it's only after going through a whole screening process where the kid or the teenager talks to psychologists and has already transitioned socially.
कोई suicide tendencies किसी को आ रही हैं,
Right.
ये तो बकायदा वेस्ट में बकायदा हेल्पलाइंस हैं, उनको रोका जाता है, उनके साथ बिठाते हैं कि कोई मसला मुझे बताओ.
Yes.
तो वो उसको क्यों रोकते हैं?
हाँ.
अगर जो करने दो करें,
सही.
सुसाइड करने दो, आपको क्या फर्क पड़ रहा है?
That's a straw man of the idea that people have bodily autonomy. While there are some fringe people who believe that people should have a right even to engage in suicide, most people don't believe that. And the reason is because suicide is a harm, unlike simply being sexually active as a gay person as opposed to a straight person. In fact, death is arguably the greatest harm that anyone can undergo. This is the reason why people don't want to kill themselves most of the time. The only time they do is when you have some extreme situation in their life. Like, for example, they're severely depressed or they're suffering from physical pain that will not go away. And in that situation, the best thing to do is try to alleviate their pain.
सिगरेट की प्रमोशन कितनी ज्यादा थी इश्तिहारात में, वेस्ट की बात कर. आज वही वेस्ट जो है वो सिगरेट के डब्बे पे लिख रहा है कि नहीं ये सेहत के लिए नुकसानदेह है.
This is such a ridiculous argument. Do you people not even feel embarrassed at the stupid shit that comes out of your mouths? First of all, there was prohibition on alcohol in the US for a certain period of time, and other places as well. When it comes to cigarettes, it is true that at one point there was more advertising of tobacco, and then there were campaigns against it which resulted in restrictions on that advertising and restrictions on where people are allowed to smoke. But this actually undermines your position, because if it turns out that homosexuality is like smoking, I've already explained why that's a false analogy, but if it turns out that that's correct, then you would expect Western people to take the same attitude toward LGBT rights as they've taken toward tobacco advertising, but they haven't. They have restricted tobacco advertising, but they've become more permissive, or more progressive rather, when it comes to LGBT rights. So that further reinforces that the two things are not analogous.
And West के अंदर, for example, marriage institution क्यों खत्म हुआ है?
अच्छा, West के अंदर marriage institution खत्म हो गया है? मुझे तो अभी इसका इत्ला मिला है, मुझे नहीं पता. मेरा ख्याल था कि लोग अभी भी शादी करते हैं.
खुद ही वो लोग खिलाफ हो गए कि हाँ ये चीज गलत. बहुत ज्यादा चैनल्स बने हुए जो डिबंक करते हैं इन सारी चीजों को. Piers Morgan is one person.
Piers Morgan is a Zionist, racist, and misogynist who actually supports gay rights. He's just transphobic to some extent, but he doesn't even oppose trans people having a right to transition. I don't know the ins and outs of his views, but it's a lot less right-wing than the views of Youth Club. But also, why does it matter what Piers Morgan says? He gets a lot of views, but his opinions are not representative of the mainstream.
Matt Walsh, just to quote one, वो है.
Matt Walsh, the Islamophobic Zionist, the fool that is Matt Walsh, that people in Western societies often mock. You think he's representative of some kind of general shift in public opinion and not just a right-wing blowhard? There's always right-wing blowhards. They existed in the past too. Like, you people's reasoning skills are just so bad. Everything from verbal comprehension to inference to just everything. It's all bad. So that concludes this Debunking Youth Club series. I've obviously omitted a lot of points because my videos would get way too long if I was debunking every one of these people's bad arguments and incorrect statements. But hopefully this will give you a sense of how much these people are full of shit, how their points against LGBT are just propaganda, there's no substance to them whatsoever, and it sucks that they're trying to indoctrinate young people into their BS. I mean, it's giving Hitler Youth. They even call themselves Youth Club, which somehow reminds me of Hitler Youth. Hopefully this has been enlightening to some people. If you disagree with anything I've said, go ahead and leave a comment, and I will try to reply. Okay, bye.